So I hope that we're now live. We're having a few technical issues. Welcome to this event kindly hosted by Women Deliver and drawing together some of Women Deliver's young leaders, as well as Philippa from Malala Fund. Unfortunately, we're having troubles having one of our speakers join, but we're hoping that she might be able to log on a little bit later on during the event. My name is Kate Redman. I work at the Global Education Monitoring Report at UNESCO. We've recently released a new report, a gender review, looking at the importance of education for gender equality, which I think is why I was chosen to do this today. I'm delighted to be able to introduce the other speakers, but perhaps I'll let them talk for themselves. So Philippa, do you want to tell everybody who you are and why you're here today?
Yes, thank you, Kate. Hi, everyone. My name is Philippa. I'm Director of Programs and Advocacy at the Malala Fund. The Malala Fund was set up a number of years ago by Malala Yousafzai, who is a girls' education activist from Pakistan. And our whole focus is around ensuring that girls can get a full 12 years of safe and free education.
Thank you. We also have Hani, who unfortunately we're not able to get on video at the minute. So we're having connectivity issues. But Hani, I know that you're there. Could you tell us a bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, hello, Kate. Good morning, everyone. I'm Hani from Indonesia. I work in private university. I'm teaching midwifery students and do research and social work on sexual reproductive health and rights, particularly on women's health.
Fantastic. So, and we're hoping that Tanzila will join us, who's from Pakistan, who works specifically on helping girls and specifically the disabled girls access education. I thought it might be interesting to start with a slightly counterintuitive fact, which is that if you look at lower secondary, there are actually more boys out of school than girls. And globally, while it may seem a surprise, there's actually gender parity, so equal numbers of girls and boys in primary school, lower secondary and upper secondary education. So I thought I might ask you, Philippa, to explain, if this is the case, why is it that we talk about girls' education? Is it a problem? And can you explain a bit more, what's the background to these statistics?
Yeah, I think it's a problem. The statistics are staggering. When you look at boys and girls from primary through upper secondary, it's over 260 million who are out of school currently, and that's kind of split down the middle, half and half boys and girls. So it's as much an issue for boys as it is for girls, and it depends where you're looking at geographically. But there are very entrenched barriers for girls getting on in life. There's very entrenched attitudes in a number of places towards girls and women. But we also know that actually investing in education for girls in particular has huge returns, not just for girls as individuals, but for their families and communities, the health of their children and for the health of their nations. So if we're trying to achieve any of these broader development goals that we've set ourselves as an international community, goals to do with health, with environment, all other areas of life, then we need to be investing in girls' education.
And are there particular regions or countries that you could talk about where it is that where girls are falling the furthest behind, just to give an idea of the different kind of contexts that there are?
Yeah, so you're obviously the expert on this, Kate, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Sub-Saharan Africa is a particular area where girls are falling behind. So the international community have signed up to every child being able to complete secondary education by the end of 2030. But a number of countries in Sub-Saharan Africa are about 100 years off achieving that, given the rates of progress. And it's not just countries, it's geographic regions within countries. So within countries, you can get some girls who are progressing all the way through the system, but actually then you get the poorest girls, often in rural situations, or girls who are marginalised through other factors such as disability or conflict, who are particularly missing out.
Thank you. I wonder, is Tanzila, are you there? Have you just joined us?
I'm here.
Excellent. Welcome. Perhaps you could just introduce yourself to everybody you've just joined and tell them what it is, what you work on in Pakistan.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Basically, I am a wheelchair user, and in Pakistan, I work for disability rights and women empowerment. My job is to connect the disability world with what you may call the regular world, and we try to produce positive results and connect bridges and make sure that there is inclusion in every sector.
Fantastic. Well, I think you entered the conversation at a good time. We've just heard from Philippa where it is, which countries and regions where girls are falling the furthest behind. But I wondered if we should probably move away from numbers and sort of statistics and generalizations and actually discuss who are these girls and what are the barriers that they're actually facing in their everyday lives. And maybe, Hani, you could start by talking about the vulnerabilities that girls face that are creating these barriers to education. You may be having troubles.
Hello,
Tanzila,
yes.
Ah, perfect. Is that Hani?
Yeah.
Hani?
Yeah.
Did you
Regarding
hear my...
Indonesia, about the barrier for the girls to get education and which one the vulnerable group in Indonesia. As Indonesia is an archipelago country, so we have around 17,000 islands. It affects the inequality of infrastructure development, such as the road condition, public transportation, and the availability of school. So this disparity influences the access to education among the citizens. In some regions, they struggle to go to school due to very bad road condition. There is no transportation, or even they need to cross the river without proper bridge. And about the vulnerable group, so in Indonesia, we have a problem with the lack of access and economic constraints, because a family with a low income tend to force their girls to work and to support their family, and girls in remote area have a higher risk to be out from secondary school. Only 55% of children from low-income family are enrolled in junior secondary school. And also about the culture, it is because they believe, why we need to send our girls to school if it doesn't change our life condition. And another belief is girl doesn't need to have education, as they will be a wife who is only responsible for domestic roles like cooking, washing, cleaning, and taking care of the kids. And also in particular ethnic group, parents tend to force their girls to get married earlier. For example, in Sudanese people, they believe that when girls get their first menstruation, so that means that they are ready to get married. They also believe that it is shameful for the parent if their girls is not married by the age of 12 years old.
It's interesting you mentioned culture, because I think that that's something that many people overlook. It's not just a question of getting equal numbers of boys and girls in school. Gender equality in education means so much more. It's about tackling traditions that have meant for many years that girls have been the furthest behind and face stereotypes and barriers, not just in school, but also when they leave and accessing employment and leadership roles. So it's a very valid point. Tanzila, I know that you work specifically on children living with disabilities, and I wondered if you could talk about their particular disadvantages and the types of barriers that they're facing and having to overcome if they are to access quality education. I see that she's just left the conversation, so I think we'll tackle that one when she comes back. I think it's very good that you talked about child marriage as well, various other types of inequalities, gender inequalities that are taking place, these are inequalities that are faced by children that are meaning that they often drop out of school, that there's not learning as well in school, and I think if we're trying to take a broader look at what gender equality in and through education looks like, these are all areas that we have to start discussing on a daily basis. It's not enough just to look at enrollment rates. It's something that the gender review of our recent report has taken a stab at, and hopefully trying to move the discussion forward, thinking about what gender equality in and through education can mean for instance, who's making financial decisions in the household, or what does the gender balance look like in leadership and in politics and in employment in the workplace. I think that only if we really think about gender equality in a more holistic way are we going to be able to break down the inequalities and the barriers facing girls and young women and men in broader society. Hani, I know you've done a lot of work that is joining together education and health, which is one example of how we need to kind of work across sectorally if we're going to be able to break down the barriers that girls and young women are facing, not just in school but throughout life. Is that something that you could describe a bit more specifically, perhaps the sexuality education work that you've been dealing with?
Yeah, so first of all, we need to address the culture norms and practices by empowering the local leaders to raise awareness among the parents in order to give girls an equal opportunity to get into school without forcing them to work to support family and marriage in early age. And by empowering the local leaders, we can also to give them the education in SRSR for the parent and also for the community, and to raise awareness among them that the importance of education, the importance of delay the child marriage, and we need also to collaborate the local NGO to provide the alternative education for the girls who are already out of school and give them such as life skill training, and also reach the vulnerable group like street children and provide them with informal education in the society, in the community.
I think your point also about empowering local leaders is an interesting one, because it brings up the idea that if we're going to tackle gender equality, we can't just be talking to girls as well. I think we need to be thinking about how we can include boys and young men and men in trying to change the conversation and tackle these unbalanced gender norms. This is something I know that you work on a bit more, Philippa, in terms of who we're trying to target and how can we actually make change. I think, between and within our circles, we can all talk to each other for hours and hours and hours, but we need to talk to people who aren't listening. So perhaps you could tell us who are the people who are going to help us make a difference and make a change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just on your point on the role of men and boys, I should say that the Malala Fund was co-founded by Malala, but also her father, Ziauddin. And if you're aware of Malala's story, you'll know that he went against what was culturally accepted when Malala was born, and he was convinced that she should have a good quality education, and he did everything within her power to send her to school and to get her an education. And so he's a strong advocate for girls' education. And at the Malala Fund, we work with a number of young women who are strong advocates in their own community for education. But each of those young women has a very strong and supportive male by their side. That could be their father or their brother or their uncle. And we've worked with many young women who have come to places like New York with us to speak to world leaders, and they've come with that supportive male, and just seeing the impact that they have on, first and foremost, allowing that girl to go to school, but then supporting her in her ambitions to progress and to speak out for others. It has a tremendous impact. So I would totally agree that actually changing the dynamics around girls in their immediate families is incredibly important. And then just giving kudos to those within families who do stand up against the status quo and stand up for women, I think is hugely powerful. On a broader level, we believe at Malala Fund that it's absolutely government responsibility to ensure that every girl and every boy can get a good quality education. And so we're pushing at both global levels, so global level commitments through big global agendas like Sustainable Development Goals, and through national level commitments to education, which are both policies and funding, to ensure that every girl is getting the opportunity to go to school for free for a full 12 years.
Thank you. I wonder what you might think about teachers and what the role is of teachers in the classroom for helping tackle some of these stereotypes. I know that our report has done quite a lot of work on the persistent gender bias that you see in textbooks, that teachers are using in the classroom. So there is definitely a role that teachers need to play in terms of challenging those and talking with the children to challenge any views that they might come to school with. Is that part of the plan as well?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a whole community effort. Because we're not just talking about education. A lot of what happens in education and the dynamics are sort of mirroring dynamics from broader society. So actually addressing some of those issues of others outside of the education space as well as within it is important. But as you say, teachers are having that one-on-one interaction with young people and modeling the relationship that is appropriate between men and women, but also challenging people's attitudes and challenging the status quo. And so I think they really do have a role in putting forward a message that men and women, boys and girls are equal and both have an equal right to a good quality education. And then you have local leaders, as Hani was saying, and then broadening out to national leaders.
Because I think it's probably a point that we don't think about enough. Here, all of us who work on education thinks that education can save the day, but I think it's our last report certainly, has a little warning in it that says it's not just any education is good. What is being taught and who is doing the teaching and how those people doing the teaching have been trained is absolutely essential to make sure that the right kind of citizens and the right types of values and attitudes and skills, are being fostered, so that when they leave, we are changing these difficult barriers and stereotypes that are persisting. I don't know, Hani, have you come across the idea of gender bias existing in classrooms and how in the classroom girls have had to fight against what they might be being taught at all?
Yes, about the gender bias in class, usually I remember when I was in elementary school, so usually the leader in the class is a boy rather than girls, and also the book that the material that we give is mostly the example is like the girls look like they are. The boys look like they are more clever than the girls. From the book, and also in the book, usually they tend to give an example of the leadership of boys rather than girls, and what is the job for the boys and girls, and usually they give an example that girls is only working at home like that.
That's right. It's so hard to change traditions, but I think it's something that it can't just be the education sector. It needs to be all the sectors, all of us working together at all levels of education and outside to try and change traditions that are meaning that there is this assumption that there might be specific roles in the household and that there might be specific jobs that girls can take and that boys can take. There's a lot of evidence to show that there are gender norms in terms of what subjects girls are choosing to study at university, whether it be engineering or mathematics or science studies, or whether it be studies like education, for instance, which is the majority of those studying education are female. So there's no quick fix to this. I just stepping back a bit, and I should say that if anybody has questions to ask, which we'll come to soon, they can do so via Twitter using the hashtag AskWD, WD being for Women Deliver. But we'll move on to those soon. But just to step back a bit, Philippa, could you maybe just say, what does gender equality look like, so we know exactly what we're talking about? Because we can throw that word around, but it means nothing if we don't all have the same definition, maybe.
Absolutely, and I think we probably all do have different ideas in our heads. I mean, for us, it's very much about having the same ambitions for girls as for boys, not putting a barrier on the ambitions that you have for them, or a container that you have for girls because of their gender. So thinking that girls can go on and become the next world leaders, they can become doctors, scientists, teachers, coders, whatever they want to be, and that they have the same opportunities that boys have.
I think that's exactly right. I think you can. I saw an excellent campaign where they sat school children down and they asked them to draw their heroes, and they were drawing doctors and astronauts and firemen and military leaders, and they were obviously all with the specific classic gender breakdowns. And then the school invited an actual astronaut to come in who was a female, and they invited a female doctor in, and they invited another male teacher, and etc. And the children with their mouths dropped open. I thought it was a brilliant example of exactly what we're up against when we're trying to tackle those things. Perhaps we'll move on to a few questions, because some have come in. I think this one for you, Hani, would be, what's the best way to convey comprehensive sexuality education to girls who are out of school? Because obviously you don't have that easy mechanism to reach them. Hi, Hani, can you hear us? If not, Philippa, do you want to have a go?
I'm really hoping Hani joins again. He's the expert on this. I mean, I would just say that we've talked about the education and people's perceptions actually being outside of the classroom as well. And so I think getting some of these messages into mainstream media and into wider society among girls who may not be in school but will be picking up messages from wider society is really important.
I think so. On a similar track, we had a question from the European Parliamentary Forum on Population and Development in Brussels, who asked, "Are there any proven successful strategies for ensuring that rural girls stay in school?" Hani, I see you just joined. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Excellent. Did you hear that last question? How do we help ensure that rural girls can stay in school?
Sorry?
I wonder if you, a question that's come through from Twitter asking, are there any proven successful strategies for ensuring that rural girls stay in school? I wonder if you have any examples from your experience. Okay, I think we're going to have to go back to you, Philippa. You're on the hot spot.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think it comes back to a lot of what we've talked about, which is around sort of both aspirations for girls, but also opportunities. Because a lot of times aspirations are based on the opportunities that are available for girls. And actually, if the best way to ensure your livelihood or your family's livelihood is to take girls out of school and get them involved in work either at home or on the land, then you will do that. But if there are other pathways where families can see that girls can achieve better livelihoods for themselves, then they'd be more likely to keep them into school. I think also a lot of families that we talk to in a number of the countries where we support programs, violence is a huge issue. Safety of girls is paramount. And so I think doing what can be done to ensure girls are safe on the way to school, but also in school, is a really critical intervention.
I know as well, to help protect them against any form of violence on the way to and from school, one way can be better forms of transport. For instance, provided transport to get them to schools has been used in some countries. But I think even just generally helping with transport and access to schools for many rural girls is such a big issue that clearly if they're having to walk for miles and miles and hours in order to get to school, that's going to be a major barrier and might make it more likely that they're going to drop out. And I think there's also been some research that's certainly cited in our report about the impact that having a female teacher can have in providing a positive role model for girls, which is why it's something that we monitor actually on a regular basis as one clear way of, seeing, looking at gender inequality in education. And then many countries have looked at that positively and have recognized that it is important. Countries like Afghanistan saying that they're going to increase the number of female teachers. It's a promise that they've made that we need to make sure that they follow up on. But these are positive. This is positive recognition, I think, of the types of things that might help address the fact that some of these girls are not going to school.
That's just to come back on that. I think that's absolutely right, and one of the things that we see is actually the higher the level of education, the less female teachers there tends to be. And so, in terms of keeping girls in school through the different stages, with female teachers having such an influence on whether girls are in the classroom or not, that can have a detrimental impact if they're not teaching at those higher levels of secondary education in particular.
And in terms of challenging gender norms, I guess if you have only males in school management and predominantly females in preschool teachers roles, it just aids the sort of stereotype that it might be men who can only make it to leadership roles and not women, for instance, which is something that needs to be addressed, therefore, for many types of reasons. Another question we had was the role that parliamentarians can play in ensuring that girls stay in school or return to formal schooling. I don't know what you think of that one.
I think this is huge, and we're talking with an organisation called Women in Parliament who works with female parliamentarians to think about how we can engage some of those women parliamentarians to push for better legislation, particularly for girls' education. So a number of countries will have legislation that talks about the right to education, but then it doesn't have specific legislation that talks about what they will do to ensure that girls get into school. And I think parliamentarians can be key in getting that legislation passed. And we know that if things are written down in law, they don't necessarily happen, but then parliamentarians can hold the governments to account for that. I mean, there are instances of countries with discriminatory laws, like, if a girl is pregnant or has a child, then she can't come back to school. But we know that girls who are pregnant or girls who have had children are just as able to learn as girls who aren't pregnant or don't have children. And actually, it's really important for them to get the skills that they need to support themselves and their families going forward. So parliamentarians can either call for those kinds of laws to be withdrawn or can call for anti-discrimination legislation to be put in place where it's needed.
Hani, I see you've returned. Can you hear me? Unfortunately, I think the sound has gone. Okay. I think one thing that's interesting at the minute is seems to be a wave of male politicians talking about them being a feminist, which I think is something we should probably celebrate. It's what you're talking about, the male role models who need to be making the difference. In terms of having more women in Parliament and what that will do, it will be interesting to see what the difference might be on laws coming out of Rwanda, where there are 64% of parliamentarians are women. I think it's the highest percent in the world. I know our latest gender review looked at the impact of female schooling on things like the environment, not just in terms of how it can more women with secondary education can reduce the number of deaths from natural disasters because of how they're aiding the resilience of their communities, for instance. But also, one thing I thought was particularly interesting was that more women in Parliament meant it more likely that environmental treaties would be passed, which I thought was very a new piece of information I'd not heard before, but certainly it goes to show the different forms of benefits that there can be from greater gender equality right up the chain, not just in school, but also in leadership roles as well. I think we have another few questions, so let me just have a look. Okay, here's a question that's come from Mustafa. It says that the photo on the advert for this conversation is an Afghan girl. But here in Afghanistan, things like security and discrimination between sons and daughters are the main problems that stop girls from going to school. How can we talk with parents about getting their girls to school? Hani, if you can join in and heard that, please do. Otherwise, maybe Philippa, you can start.
Okay. Again, I feel like a bit of a fraud speaking to these questions as someone who was born and brought up in the UK, but I'll speak from the experience that we've had with Malala Fund, and I'm very happy to be corrected by those who have more knowledge in this area than I do. So one of the countries that we have been working with local partners in to support girls' education is Afghanistan. And actually, we have found this, that actually it's not engaging at the policy level that's the issue. It's engaging with communities and families so that they feel happy to send their girls to school. And this has a lot to do with the presence of female teachers, as we talked about, safety, security, aspirations for women. One of the things that we have done over the past year is we've used a documentary film which came out about the life of Malala to date, which shows very clearly the role that her father played in getting her into education, and challenges some of the common perceptions about women's role in society and the role that education should or shouldn't play in their lives. And we've shown that with community, so we've translated it into, I think, about 14 different languages and dialects. So we've shown that with communities in Afghanistan, with young people, but also with fathers and mothers. And that's had a real impact, as it stimulated conversations among those communities and with parents about, well, what is the role of girls? Was Malala's father right to insist that his daughter had an education? Why was he right to do so? Why should he do that on an equal basis with Malala's brothers? And that's been really good. I think getting people to talk about these issues and question their assumptions has seemed to be something that has a real impact. But I think getting a person to speak out about that is quite brave. You need to be quite brave to kind of to test or challenge the status quo. But I would very much agree that creating safe spaces where you can have these very open and honest conversations with communities, but also then bringing in girls' voices and hearing about what they want for their life, what they want to come, what they want to achieve, is also incredibly powerful. Seeing the potential in girls, and actually, if we really did kind of open the doors of our schools to them and say, go learn, become what you want to, that's going to have a transformative effect on society as a whole.
I think that's maybe why our new education agenda, the new set of goals that we've got, and then the fourth goal, which is on education, has made us look further than just primary education, but at lifelong learning and what we're learning from the cradle to the grave. So, from infancy right through to adulthood, because if we're going to challenge the status quo and we're going to make our way towards gender equality, then it can't just be in school. We've got to look at those who are out of school now, and those who are adults and what perceptions they've got. And that's got to be about, it's a huge role for NGOs such as yours in terms of campaigns, information campaigns, for instance, but also campaigns that could be run by governments to partnering or not with NGOs to try and change some of the perceptions that people have got that are perhaps not as balanced as they could be. Hani, have you joined us back, I wonder? All right. In that case, I think we got one last question because Philippa, I feel like you're being really, it's tough. This is a tough call for you. This is from Estelle Loiseau, and the question is, and you've touched on it actually, safe spaces. So it says safe spaces can contribute to increase girls' confidence and active participation in schools. The question is, do you have any successful country examples, which I'm not sure necessarily you might, but if not, then just to perhaps elaborate a bit on the importance of safe spaces and what that can do for girls' confidence skills.
Yeah. So again, through the work that we've been doing over the past year using the film, we've worked with a number of girl groups in countries such as Afghanistan, Nigeria, Kenya, Pakistan, and others, to create these safe spaces for girls to come together and to talk about their futures, to encourage each other, to advocate for one another. And we've seen the solidarity, but also the mentorship has had a tremendous impact on girls' confidence to speak out. And not just their confidence to speak out, but their confidence to really aim for the stars and become someone other than the world says they should be. And I think we all know that getting together with groups with friends who believe the same sort of things as us gives us more confidence and belief in that and in ourselves. And so I think just creating these spaces for girls to talk together has tremendous impact. And I think if you look at work of some other organisations like CAMFED, who use this as a model, Age Africa and their chats model, we see the power of just creating a space for girls to come together and have very open and honest dialogues with one another, and to get the confidence and tools they need to take that out into wider society.
Well, it's a shame that we weren't able to have Hani and Tanzila here with us to have a broader conversation here today. Especially it would have been nice because it would have been great to have that country, those country level stories, which are so important if we're really to tackle these issues. Get out from behind our desks and talk to real people on the ground and people who are going to, at the end of the day, help spread the word and make a difference. Thank you to everybody for all of the questions that have come in from Twitter, and again to Women Deliver for hosting us. A big thank you to Philippa for taking so many questions, and for Hani for being there in the background. It must be very frustrating not to be able to take part, but thank you for hanging on. I'm sure that we'll be able to answer any ongoing questions you have on Twitter via hashtag AskWD, if any are remaining. Aside from that, I think we'll draw it to close a little bit early because we've been so short, and unfortunately on our technical capacity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.